cold wind swept through the gray avenues of Minsk, carrying the faint echo of chanting voices and the metallic clatter of police shields. The city had not seen such crowds since the protests 5 years earlier, but now thousands were back on the streets, faces half, covered with scarves, eyes fierce with exhaustion and determination. This time the anger felt heavier, like a storm waiting to break. Inflation had eaten away salaries, corruption scandals had piled up, and the army's growing involvement in civil affairs had pushed ordinary people past their limits. Near Independence Square, a young man named Pavel stood on a concrete barrier, his hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. He shouted into a loudspeaker that barely worked, his voice rough but unyielding. Around him, students, factory workers, and elderly pensioners moved like waves, chanting for freedom and justice. The government had deployed armored vehicles at key intersections. Soldiers stood in lines with rifles across their chests, their expressions hidden behind tinted visors. The generals had warned the president that control was slipping fast, that the streets were no longer loyal. Inside the Ministry of Defense, General Viktor Baranov stared at a map of the city, each district glowing red on the digital screen. His aides waited for his decision. He had spent 30 years in uniform, loyal to the regime, loyal to the flag, but even he could feel the fracture lines widening inside his own ranks. Some younger officers had refused to fire tear gas on civilians. Others had disappeared entirely. Rumors spread that one entire regiment near the outskirts had switched sides, protecting the protesters instead of dispersing them. By midnight, Minsk was burning in fragments. Trash bins were overturned, police stations surrounded, slogans painted on walls, "No more generals, no more lies." The air smelled of smoke and winter dust. Pavel and his friends huddled in an abandoned bus stop, sharing bread and power banks, their eyes glowing with a mix of fear and courage. He told them that if they didn't stand now, they would be crushed forever. No one answered, but no one left either. Above them, the sound of helicopters sliced the night sky. At the same hour, in a secure compound outside the city, General Baranov met with 2 other senior commanders. They had received a direct order to restore control by any means necessary. But Baranov hesitated. He remembered 1991, when his father told him that soldiers should protect people, not rule them. Yet the regime offered no mercy for hesitation. A single act of disobedience could mean prison, or worse. As the generals argued, news came in that a crowd of protesters had stormed a government warehouse, seizing riot gear and broadcasting live on social media. The government channels went silent. By dawn, the first gunshots echoed through Lenin Street. Journalists streamed shaky videos showing soldiers pushing forward, protesters throwing stones, and a city that looked like a war zone. Pavel ran toward the barricades, shouting for people to stay united. His friend Mila, a medical student, dragged the wounded to safety. The air was thick with smoke and confusion. Somewhere near the main square, a soldier hesitated before pulling the trigger. For the first time, the army wasn't sure who the enemy was. Inside the ministry bunker, General Baranov watched live feeds on the screen. His aide whispered that parts of the Northern Division had refused to deploy. "They're joining the civilians," the aide said. Baranov leaned back, covering his face with both hands. He knew the revolution had begun, but not from outside, from within his own army. Outside, the city lights flickered as power stations failed one by one. Minsk, the silent capital, was now awake, trembling under the weight of its own awakening. 3 days later, the city no longer followed any command. Roads were blocked by makeshift barricades of cars and burned buses. The government buildings were guarded, but the chain of control was breaking fast. Soldiers abandoned their posts, some joining civilians, others vanishing into the night. Smoke hung above the skyline like a dark halo. The people of Minsk no longer spoke in whispers. They shouted in the open, defying curfews and sirens. The revolution had a rhythm now. Marches in the morning, clashes in the evening, silence at dawn. Pavel and his group had moved into an old printing house, turning it into their headquarters. Laptops and radio sets covered the tables. Printing machines stamped out leaflets calling for free elections and an end to military rule. Mila coordinated first aid stations across the districts. Every day they risked arrest, but the fear had changed into resolve. "We've already lost too much to turn back," Mila told him one night as the two of them looked out the window at the flames lighting the city horizon. In the presidential palace, the aging leader sat surrounded by silence. His ministers had stopped answering calls. He turned to General Baranov, demanding absolute loyalty. "You will crush this chaos," he said, voice trembling with fury. Baranov nodded but said nothing. He had seen too many coffins in 3 days, too many young men carrying weapons against their own neighbors. Later that night, he met secretly with Colonel Drovsky, one of the younger officers who had openly refused to attack civilians. "If we keep obeying," Drovsky said quietly, "we'll destroy the country we swore to defend." Baranov stared at him for a long time, then finally whispered, "Maybe it's already destroyed." Outside, a convoy of armored vehicles moved through Victory Avenue, but people poured into the streets, blocking their path. Mothers carrying flowers stood in front of tanks. Some soldiers lowered their weapons. Others fired warning shots in the air. Cameras captured every moment, streaming to the world. The footage of unarmed citizens standing before the army went viral, spreading faster than the government could censor it. For the first time, foreign news channels spoke of the Minsk uprising. By the 6th day, the balance shifted. The army was divided in two: loyalists holding the central command and reformists guarding the outer districts. Skirmishes erupted in the industrial zones. Pavel's voice became one of the leading ones on independent radio, calling for non-violence even as bullets flew. His words echoed across the streets. "We don't fight soldiers. We fight the system that made them our enemies." Even General Baranov heard those words over a confiscated radio, and something in him broke. He issued a secret order to pull back troops from residential areas, defying the president's command. That night, the palace went dark. Explosions rocked the courtyard, and loyalist guards fled. Rumors spread that the president had escaped. By morning, the national flag was lowered from the tower and replaced with a plain white banner, symbol of surrender or peace depending on who you asked. The revolution had lasted only a week, but it felt like a lifetime. Pavel stood in the square, watching the sun rise over a wounded city. Around him were faces covered in dust, tears, and hope. No one cheered, they simply breathed in disbelief. General Baranov walked through the ruined corridors of the Defense Ministry, medals still pinned to his chest. He met Pavel at the square later that day, their eyes locking in silence. Neither spoke about victory or defeat. The city was broken, the people exhausted, but something irreversible had happened. The fear had gone. Baranov saluted quietly, then walked away into the crowd, a soldier without a regime, a man without a war. And in the heart of Minsk, the bells rang faintly from an old church that had been silent for years, echoing through empty streets. The revolution was not over. It had only just begun, in the hearts of those who finally believed that generals and protesters could never again be the same.